My game of the day from round 11 of the candidates tournament is Ding Liren with white against Alexander Grischuk. So Ding on 50%, he's drawn all his games. Grischuk just a half a point ahead of that. But as things are slowing down at the top, if either of these players manage to score a win, then they could actually bring themselves into contention. So, a sharp game suited both players. Starts out as an English, and very quickly we transpose into, well, I suppose you call it a semi-Tarrasch. I mean, both sides starting in a very unpretentious way. And A3, this is an absolutely normal move, because sometimes you want to take on C5 and play B4. Sometimes it's useful after this to be able to drop the bishop back here. And here Grischuk took on C4, and now we have a direct transposition to a Queen's Gambit accepted. A6, same idea, you want to play B5 and gain some space. So this is a very normal, typical kind of position. And now Queen E2, of course, makes room for the rook to come across here, support the D pawn, and the Queen preempts that and comes to C7. As we'll see, the Queen can often find itself quite busy on this diagonal. Kramnik has played rook d1 in this position previously, d5 also possible, but Ding selects, well, yeah, again, a very unpretentious move actually, bishop d2, simply with the idea of bringing the rook to c1. After bishop e7, you could actually even take here and play rook c1, because there's a lot of traffic on the c file. But, well, Ding played there straight away, and that provokes this move c4. Now, from a purely positional point of view, of course, it looks very nice to have a lovely pawn chain here, quite far advanced, and also, for the moment, it blocks out the bishop on a2, but of course that can duck back here. And in playing c4, it takes away all the pressure from d4, so that now white has a very pleasant central pawn majority. Rook d8 hits the d pawn, bishop e3, and knight g4. And, well, knight g4 looks like a very tricky move, looking at the bishop and also looking at h2. That's important. So, for example, if white plays bishop b1, black is actually able to take here, and that wins a pawn, because if bishop takes, knight takes, hits the queen, and threatening here, and queen h2 mate. Absolutely typical trick for this kind of Queen's Gambit accepted. So after knight g4, important that Ding closed this diagonal and played e5. And after the game, Grischuk said that this is supposed to be good for black, but he didn't know how. And I think this is the problem with when you prepare with a computer, and you'll see that there's an assessment there that is favourable for black, or let's just say fine for black, not worse. But unless one actually researches these positions really thoroughly, then you'll get to the board and go, okay, what now? And I think this is a typical case where, yes, if you flick on the engine, you'll see that black is actually doing okay here. However, in practical terms, I think this is a much easier position for white to play than black. Black has to get it absolutely right, and it's not easy to do that. Grischuk played knight a5, and I have to say my first reaction to that is that it looks a bit funny to put the knight at the side of the board. And the computer actually wants to play f5, which to my eyes looks really bizarre. Really bizarre. But there is a tactical trick, and it's the one we've just seen, or similar. If you take en passant, then black can play knight takes pawn, got to be taken, And then bishop takes knight, and queen takes h2. That's a problem. But f5, although it feels flimsy because, you know, this pawn looks a bit weak somehow, and, you know, you could set yourself up for d5. But it does take away the e4 square from white, and that's very important, so that the knight doesn't have a good square. And also it will block out that bishop as well. But it's a very double-edged position, I have to say, and I'm not surprised that maybe that didn't really appeal to Grischuk, or perhaps it didn't even cross his mind. He played knight a5, and now bishop f4. Queen b6. So bishop f4, yeah, directed against these funny threats on the diagonal. So Ding protects the pawn here, and now h5. And Grischuk admitted after the game he thought h5 was just a poor move. And now that he's driven back, I mean, the knight is terribly placed. The pawn isn't great on h5. The problem is black's king. It doesn't actually have a safe home. Ding played bishop b1, so redeploying the bishop on this superb diagonal. I mean, black is hardly going to go kingside here. If you castle kingside, you'll be mated rapidly. Grischuk played the knight into b3, but I mean, he wasn't convinced by this at all. Bishop b3, just holding the d pawn and threatening d5. The queen goes back, and rook fe1. It's a really horrible position for black. Grischuk played king f8, and now Ding went for it, and his attack is great. He played d5, crashing through. This was taken, and he went for it with e6. He could blockade with knight d4 in that position, but I mean, e6 is such an attractive move, giving away two pawns just to open the position, and also you'll be able to use these squares as well. But basically, it's all about opening the e file. So knight g5, and I mean, there are some nice variations here. If bishop takes knight, then obviously there's an attack here. So if rook here, then bishop g6, hitting the rook, and now knight d5. I mean, what a picture of centralization. Obviously that can't be taken because of mate on e8. What else have we got? Well, bishop c8 protects the pawn here, but then we give a check. And Ding said he just wanted to play bishop f4. Grischuk was looking at various sacrifices with knight d5. Bishop f4 is fantastically strong, because after this you can play here and then just take here. And if this, then you take on e7, and the problem is black's king and rook, well, they're the wrong way round. I mean, it's gone basically. It's gone completely. So knight g5, Grischuk played queen d7, bishop g6. It's not getting better, and bishop b6. Excellent move. So now white's queen and rook are unleashed against the e pawn, and rook threatened as well. If bishop takes knight, then bishop takes rook, and you take on e6. And black is just so tied up here. So, I mean, for the moment, black has two minor pieces for the rook, but this one isn't coming out. The king is trapped. Mate threatened here. If bishop e7, you take on d5. And well, it's just completely lost. Black is completely tied up. So, I mean, this is the line that Ding demonstrated after the game. Very straightforward indeed, and wins material. Knight threatened, and then rook d8. Okay, lots of nice variations. So knight takes pawn threatened, for example, queen d7, bishop g6, bishop f6. We've gone this far already. So rook c8. Ding crashed through on e6. And now, incredibly, Ding missed a win here that has great similarities to Kramnik's winning move against Aronian from the previous round. He could win with knight d8. So it's about the back rank. If that's taken with the bishop, then that's checkmate in a couple of moves. There we are. No escape for the king. Disaster. And, well, apart from that, you can play rook takes. Same story. Same story. It's going to be mate on d8. I mean, knight d8 is a very straightforward winning move. There is no decent defense after that. But Ding played knight takes d5. Also a winning move. That was taken. And once again, you've still got knight d8. But clearly the move just didn't cross his mind. He played knight f4 instead. And this is also winning. I mean, it's hardly surprising. You know, black is just completely cut in half. You know, the rooks don't connect. The king's in trouble. So, I mean, both players were in time pressure. They do like to get in time pressure, both Grischuk and Ding. And Grischuk threw in knight c1. And here, Ding went with queen h5. But, I mean, if you're in time pressure, it seems to me that keeping things simple often helps. Clearly, he'd lost his kind of overview at this point, because this is very simple. Again, simply because the king is in such a terrible position, and white isn't even material down for this position. So, for example, bishop f7. Okay, let's centralize. We hit the queen. Queen moves. I mean, Ding was looking at this afterwards, or looking at stuff with bishop d4. I mean, which is probably good. Could just play the bishop here and let black stew in his own juice. Black's king is not getting out here. I kind of like putting the bishop on a5 because it just tucks it out of the way. It's not loose in any way, and you know, sometimes it can duck back here. Or to c3 if necessary to trade bishops, and then white just gets on with it through the middle. That looks very straightforward, but Ding took on h5 instead, and knight hopped into d3, which, you know, you've got seconds on the clock. Suddenly, boom, knight d3 is on the board. You could just take that off, just clear some wood, and that should be winning, pin and win. But no, Ding took here, and then knight f7. I mean, how Grischuk managed to keep going here is extraordinary. And there is a win here. Again, if you're short of time, you're not going to be able to calculate this, but knight f6 is winning. We take here, and this is the important move, queen g4. So as well as check, it's also hitting the rook, so the king has to come up. You give a check here. Now queen g6 will be met by rook e7, so the king has to come here, and rook e4 to g4, and that's going to be a winning attack. Okay, that's another win. But the queen came back to e2, knight e5, and the bishop came back to protect the knight. Still looks absolutely crushing for white because, of course, knight takes rook would be met by knight takes check, and you take the queen. So in this position, Grischuk staggered on with rook h4, an amazing move, and it creates just enough complications to befuddle Ding in this position. I mean, there are lots of good moves here. I still like bishop a5, I must admit. Bishop a5 appeals to me, tucking the bishop out of the way and threatening this. But Ding went for f4, and he must have completely overlooked rook takes. Well, he took this, and black can get away with this because after rook takes queen here, let me show that, then you can take the queen, and unbelievably black survives. There you go, loose bishop on b6, told you it should be on a5. But in this position, Ding came up with bishop h7 check, which, you know, on another day would win instantly. If that's taken, then queen e4 check, and then you take the queen. So bishop h7, king h8 keeps black in the game. Queen e4 protects the bishop. I mean, white is still winning. He's the exchange up, but actually Ding messes up here. I mean, he should clear some wood off the board with queen f4, but he played bishop d4, and Grischuk now missed a great chance. He could have played knight d3, because if queen takes c6, then that is check, and then you recapture. Of course, white doesn't need to do that. You can take on f6, but black is back in the game there. But instead, as Grischuk said, he got very excited and took the pawn on h3. And if g takes, then you give a check, and you take on d4, and black survives. But so after knight takes, Ding played king h2. This is the 39th move. Grischuk said afterwards that he had originally intended queen e4, but forgot that white could simply recapture with the bishop. This is time pressure, folks. 39th move for Grischuk, knight g5. Ding traded the queens, and they've reached move 40. So they're given extra time at this point, and they can sit back and survey the damage. And here, sensibly, Ding just retreated the bishop. He's the exchange up. He's got two bishops. He's got beautifully centralized rooks. It must be winning for white. But Ding now played a very odd move. He gave up his two bishops. Bishop c3 just looks very normal. You keep those two beautiful bishops. You keep black's minor pieces tied up. I mean, Grischuk was amazed that Ding didn't go in for this and just rook d5, because I mean, black is so pinned in this position, and at some moment white is going to be able to break through. Maybe you break up the pawns with a4. It's just such an unpleasant position. But I mean, Ding did something similar. He took here and then played rook d5. Now there's a back rank problem for black. If the knight moves, then rook e8. But incredibly, Grischuk survives with this rook move. Black is pinned, but there's no really good way to exploit this. So first of all, we need to move the king, otherwise knight g4 will come and are discovered. So king h3, and now the king approached. And here again, an odd decision by Ding. He played b3, but bishop f5 I think is a much better chance. It keeps more pawns on the board, and black still has problems to solve in this position. But no, b3, and now we've got a liquidation. I mean, it could be that Ding was simply tired. You know, he's not built like Magnus, it has to be said. He's built more like me. He's built like a coat hanger. And I mean, when I was playing, you know, serious tournament chess, I have to say, I always had problems after the time control. After kind of 4 hours, you know, I used to feel my energy just going completely. So, you know, I'd stock up with, you know, whatever, chocolate bars and bananas, and just to keep the energy going. And I suspect that Ding has a problem with that. Having said that, he managed to hold the game against Caruana the other day. So, he's a strong player, but it did go badly wrong here, because here, you know, having traded all these pawns, then black is obviously much, much closer to drawing the game. And I think, you know, in practical terms, this should be a draw now. I'm going to leap ahead because Ding kept going. You know, he did set Grischuk problems. So I'm going to leap ahead 20 odd moves to this position. Ding has managed to advance his g-pawn here to g6. Grischuk has managed to get his b-pawn down the board. The rook is behind it and the bishop is there covering the queening square. Grischuk made a queen, so that got taken. And then Ding took on g7. Now, if that's taken, then white wins. The knight cannot get back if the king steps to the right square and the pawn rolls home. But this is still okay for black, because black just needs to give up the bishop for the pawn, and rook against knight is a theoretical draw. And, well, as Grischuk noted after the game, the bishop needs to stay on this diagonal, and there are 5 squares along this diagonal. The problem is the rook can only cover 2 of those squares, and the king can only cover 2 of those squares. So black's bishop will always have 1 spare square. And this, well, let's just go through these next moves and you can see what happens. Grischuk was very careful with his king. He didn't move it too much into the open. There we go, you can see, found the spare square on h8. But yeah, coming back to the king, Grischuk kept it behind the knight just to avoid any potential pins with the bishop. So, for example, if you can imagine the king moving here, then, you know, there could be a pin. You eliminate the bishop and the pawn rolls home. So Grischuk did it very well indeed. There you go, you can see that bishop just needs to keep out of trouble. Always got a spare square. Ding tried one last thing, which was to block on f6. We'll get to it in a second. Here we go. Crunch moment in the game, rook f6. Now, that has to be taken. Pawn is rolling home. And now you just have to get the knight into the right place. Of course, Grischuk had foreseen this position and checked that everything was working. King f7 looks scary, but there is a saving move. Knight e3. And if g7, the knight goes to f5. They repeated the position, but Ding went for g7, and here they agreed to draw. Obviously, if you get a queen, then knight here, and you take the queen off. Wow, what a game. Incredible game. 96 moves in the end. Extraordinary. I feel really sorry for Ding. You know, he played a beautiful game, but then in time pressure just didn't clinch it. Such a shame for him. So he's still drawn all his games. The really significant result today was that Karyakin defeated Aronian. Aronian having a terrible time. I mean, he really looks completely crushed at the moment. So Karyakin joins Grischuk on 6 points. Mamedyarov has 6.5. Caruana has 7. Big games on Saturday. Karyakin faces Caruana. If he beats Caruana, the tournament is blown wide open, and Mamedyarov faces Ding. Don't forget to comment, like and subscribe, and there is a Candidates 2018 playlist. If you've missed any of the videos, then do check it out. Bye now.